technology will not thwart us tonight. We have got Sello Hatang on a telephone line, and he joins us from the Nelson Mandela Foundation. We're talking, of course, about what seems to be a pivotal moment in the United States civil rights movement. Good evening once again, Sello. We're on a much better line, I'm happy to say. Looking at what's happening in the United States of America, is this something that's going to go down in history as the protest over a black killing by white cops that made the difference?
I think, again, thanks very much, Sally, for this opportunity. I think for us, we should always see this moment as a moment in history where we want the Americans and the world, in fact, to reckon with what has happened. As Reverend L. Chapman said, that you have a country that has had its majority have its knees on its minority for so long. And I think if we are to do this right, we have to always not just remember this moment for what it is now, but to say that if it has happened for 400 years, may this be the moment where it stops. Because unfortunately in South Africa we've seen, and in fact it's true to say globally, we've seen that you tend to have people being forgetful about moments like this.
You've written very interestingly about what you've almost equated to an armed struggle phase of the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, we know that there have been people in the protests who've deliberately created violence and have looted and vandalized, but you seem to be suggesting that even the legitimate protesters have been involved in some acts of violence, and you seem to be suggesting that it's almost a legitimate reason to resort to violence. However, the United States of America is a democracy. South Africa was not a democracy when Nelson Mandela went into an armed struggle. So how can we justify any act of violence in a democracy?
You know, it's during democracy that you're likely to have those kind of violent protests, in fact, because people can express themselves more. And when we hosted Thomas Piketty in 2015, he said that if inequality is not addressed through peaceful means and peaceful democratic institutions, it's always potentially a source of violence. And I think that's what we then see, that democracy needs to also withstand that kind of violence, because people get to a moment which Madiba, in fact, realized way back during the court case in 1964, when he again said that it was a planned sabotage and that these are sober-thinking people. It's not people who just go on rampage because they just want to. It's people who have had enough. And I think it's time that we reckon with that kind of enough to say that even here in South Africa, we have to pause for a second and say what's happening there is no different to our country too, where you've had the ICAD released a report which indicated that 217 people were tortured, 201 people died at the hands of the police, and 436 died again as a result of police action. All these are actions which are saying that if we are not careful, what's happening in the U.S. should happen globally. It happened in France. We are not immune to that too.
Let's look specifically at Collins Khoza for a moment, and the news this evening that the Defence Minister is saying that SANDF probe into his death is not going to be reopened. What is your response to that news?
I'm really hopeful that the Minister will review that kind of decision, because if we are a compassionate democratic country, one that cares about the pain of its people, we will always have to pause when we have caused harm. And it's never too late to just at least do what the President said we should do constantly, reckon with our mistakes. And I think the President noted in his last address that mistakes have been done under COVID, and this is one such mistake.
Absolutely.
So it's never too late to do that, to just say we've made a mistake.
Sello, I'm going to interrupt you because you mentioned the President. He's in fact launching the anti-racism campaign of the ANC right now. Let's go to that live for a moment.